for you to understand some of the basic processes of research. This is more or less a foundational course, a foundational introduction to what is research all about. Right now, most of the education that you are getting, some of the, in fact, most of the information came about as a research somebody conducted. Somebody investigated those issues, came up with findings, and from those findings, made some recommendations, and there we are. So, one way of conducting research in health, first of all, is somebody has to investigate the issue, gather the information. And most of the time is, okay, what are they investigating? Come up with a research question. Okay, like the first few weeks of the coronavirus, most of the researchers were doing a lot of investigating, and still there are some investigation going on. What is this virus? Where did it come from? Now, how does it affect people? What sort of people? And who are the people most at risk of being affected and dying from this disease? These are all studies that are going on. There are scientists that are doing the research. The more information they get, the more information they share with the public as to how to prevent. So, for instance, how can this disease be spread? They came up with the idea that, okay, this is airborne. And most of the time, our droplet, as we speak, if somebody is infected with the disease, droplets comes out of our mouth as we speak. And those droplets are airborne. And depending on the distance from you or the infected person and the other person who is not infected, they said they came up with the idea of 6 feet. Say beyond 6 feet, the virus will drop to the floor or drop somewhere and cannot be as effective. But again, this is still further investigation because, as with any new disease, it takes time for people to really have the full story. But it's like building a plane while flying. Whatever relevant information they get, they share it so that it will be used to either prevent the disease or control the disease. And later on come up with possible intervention, possible therapy, possible drugs that have that could be used to treat the disease. So research in health is very, very important. And most of the time, some of the research is highly scientific. Some of the research is the social sciences, why people do what they do, why society practices certain things and this. It does not, most of it is society, the culture. That's not hard science, the biology, the chemistry, the physics, you know, and at times also the philosophy. What are people's philosophy? Because science should be guided by certain philosophy, certain principles. You don't lie. If you do your research properly, you should be able to report your findings properly. Don't play with the data because a company or a certain group of people want you to tell them something that your research did not show. Again, we as a country are dealing with some of those issues. Different people come up with different things. So most of the time that are competing factors. Some people are give people what they want to hear. But if you go with the guidelines of research that is very unethical, you should not do that as a scientist. You stick to the scientific findings, the data that you obtain. Don't play with the data to satisfy somebody's intentions. So, two types of research methods. You have the quantitative methods that really deals mainly with science. What you based on what you find out from your subjects. It's purely research based. Then you have the qualitative, which is in a way subjective. You're dealing with people's opinion about an issue. In most cases, for effective research, both the quantitative and qualitative has values. They have their strength, they have their weaknesses. And some of those we will explain as we continue with the chapter. Boy, I want you to just put that in the back of your mind that most of the time, most of the findings that we have today are either derived through the quantitative method or through the qualitative method. And as I said, both the quantitative and the qualitative, they have each one has its strengths and its weaknesses. And at times, certain situations can be better studied either using the quantitative or the qualitative. It all depends on what is your research question. What do you want to investigate? How do you want to investigate it? Okay. So these are the aims or the objectives. And one thing that you all of you should know that before you finish your undergraduate, you'll be engaged in some research project wherein you have to write papers, either term paper or some. Well, you have to be involved in research. So make sure that you really take time to understand this chapter. If you understand this chapter, This chapter will help you at in graduate school and beyond. Because again, in today's world, research, one way or the other, you have to do it. You either do it or be able to understand it, be able to explain it. So take this chapter seriously. First of all, the aim of this investigating of health is to increase your understanding of the philosophical and methodological foundation of health-related research. The philosophical, why are you doing it? What are your parameters? How are you going to do it so that you 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 maintain the standards of research, the bylaws, things that you are allowed to do when conducting research and things that you are not allowed to do. And what are the right type of motivations to engage in research, and what are some of the wrong type of motivations to engage in research. Then once you have come up with your why you want to conduct the research, you think of what methodological approach, what method am I going to approach? Or what method am I going to use to do the investigation? Because most of the time, certain methods can help you get the right type of information you're looking for. Other methods, if you use the wrong method, most of the time you'll get something that will not help your research or will not be able to answer your research question. To encourage you to consider which method, design, and methods are appropriate to answer different types of research questions. And so be familiar with all of the stages of the research process, the different stages of the research process. You come up with this, with your topic. You see if there's any information that has already been done or similar information has already been gathered to help with your research. Because most of the time, that's why you say literature review. You conduct the literature, you see what has been done. Because most of the time when you want to go into research, you might think, oh, nobody has done this beforehand. Not necessarily. See, people have done certain things. They might have not done the same way you want to do yours, but they have done something to advance that body of knowledge. So don't neglect. See what it has been done. Do your literature review. And then you can develop your hypothesis. Then you develop your what sort of research method are you going to use? What sort of instrument are you going to use to do the investigation? How are you going to conduct your research? What methods are you using, or what instrument are you going to develop to help you get the type of information that you're looking for? Then once you're done, you should be able to analyze the nature of evidence and evidence-based practice. You gather the information, you analyze the information, then you come up with findings, what you found, make up your own conclusions, and in some cases, you can make your own recommendations as well. And one thing that you also have to bear in mind, as with any research, you have to define the parameter of your research, the scope of your research. That's why you have your target population. Who are you going to use in your research to give you what you're looking for? Are you going to do random sampling to help you get the evidence that you are looking for? Or are you going to use convenient sampling? You see, because most of the time, all of those things can determine the quality of the relevance of of your research. So now, what is research? Okay, research is an action and systematic process of inquiry. Systematic, one step after the other, of findings. Inquiry is findings in order to discover, interpret, or revise facts, events, behaviors, or theories. Is an active research is an active and systematic process of inquiry in order to discover, interpret, or revise facts, events, behaviors, or theories. Part of the research process is also making practical applications with the help of the information gathered through the research process. You see, because most of the time, as you continue to investigate, things can happen. You have to be able to engage some practical applications as you gather the information. So research is a process by which questions can both be explored and answered. You come up with the research question, now is to find out. You explore. Now, at times, why is it that, say, we can come up with a research question? Why is it that young Americans, young African Americans, have a higher incidence of hypertension at the age of, say, 19 to 25? See, that's a question, a research question. Now, why? First of all, you get your samples to African Americans from the age of, and you find out some of those factors, contributing factors. Each of those should give you answers. Research is therefore a tool to explore, describe, understand, explain, predict, intervene or change, evaluate, and assess impact. Research, we will not, the world will not be where we are today without research. There are people who are always asking questions. How can we make things better? Or why are people suffering from this disease? What could be the right type of medication? People just don't guess. They engage in research to explore, to develop some level of understanding, to explain, to predict based on their findings, and to intervene and to assess the impact. The physiological framework of research. Research is underpinned by models of understanding known as paradigms. A paradigm is a specific is a paradigm is a perspective and a way of examining and understanding reality. So a paradigm is a perspective and a way of examining and understanding. Therefore, researching reality. There are two distinct paradigms and philosophical traditions that underpins research. You have the positivism or positive approach. Positivism is associated with the quantitative research, whilst interpretism is used within qualitative approaches. Here are the assumptions. The assumptions of the positivism and the assumptions of the interpretism. Two different approaches. Now, the positive suggests that reality exists beyond our perspective. That this can be meaningfully conceptualized and is therefore measurable. Now, with the assumptions of interpretism, it's understanding things from people's point of view, the insider perspective. Now, the positivity deals with facts, not values. Interpretism deals with people's beliefs or people's places emphasis on lived experiences, subjective experiences, acknowledges that there can be multiple equally valid realities which coexist. Again, there's an assumption there. The phenomena is an objective, reliable, valid manner. Here, the reality is constructed by the social world in which we live. The research process is neutral and value free. It's just based on the data. What are the findings? Now, importance is placed on understanding the social context in which data got generated and how social actors, including researchers, influence this process. So either of these methods, they have their strength and their weaknesses. Especially when you're dealing with social matters, it's very important that you hear from the people. But some of the challenges with this approach is it's subjective, it's somebody's opinion. And most of the time, you can have about 10 people in a community, and you ask all of them, most of the time, the probability for you to have 5 different opinions or 5 different interpretation of the issue is there. Even though it's not wrong, it's just that is their perception. You see, unlike with the positivism, is there is a single truth or reality. It's not multiple. Some of the social sciences lend themselves more with a qualitative approach. The assumption of interpretism. Key point about the philosophy of research. Research can be specific paradigm and therefore apply its associated techniques in practice. There can be specific paradigms and therefore applied its associated techniques in practice. If you are trained in a positivism or if you are trained in a positivist position, then you will use quantitative methods. Comparatively, if you are trained in an interpretivist tradition, then you will apply qualitative tools of data collection. Each of these methods have different techniques, different tools. So what tools you use depends on what method you choose to conduct your research. So there are different views of what social reality looks like. The term to describe this is ontology. Ontology is defined as the study of the nature of reality. There are a range of ontological understandings, each discussing the nature of the social world. in different ways. There are also different views about what represents knowledge, how it is produced, and how it can therefore be measured. There are epistemological consideration or the study of nature of knowledge. So there are series of considerations that you really have to bear in mind when it comes to selecting what method you decide to use. How best can you really explain your findings? And what are some of your limitations? And what's the scope of your study? The research question. All research starts with a question. And this is an essential part of the research process, with the aims and purpose of the research needing to be clearly defined at the onset of the process. You have to make sure that you clearly define what you really, when you say, this is what I'm going to, or the question is this, you really know what are you really looking for when you ask that question. And there are certain times you might ask the question, and in the process, the data will give you something else. It's still, it's still relevant. Don't just throw it because your research did not give you what you want. Because there are a lot of interventions that we enjoy today that came as a result of the researchers were looking for one thing, then something else showed up. And that became very important. So most of the time it's not just because, okay, we didn't get what we want. Just report what you found. And maybe at times you might say, maybe the design of my instrument were not proper, or maybe my question was not well defined, or this question, this is the way the answer comes out. Research questions help the researchers to clarify what they are investigating and guide the researchers towards the most appropriate method to address the question. Questions arise in a variety of ways. Questions can be addressed using quantitative methods, qualitative methods, or a combination of both approaches. Because again, there are different ways you can get information, but the more ways, the better, depending on what you are really looking for. Okay, here, experiments. Okay, the RCTS, and you have surveys. These are different methods. You have the survey when you're talking of quantitative method. These are three different approaches of using the quantitative methods. Now you can find the experimental, which is okay. If I combine this, this chemical and this chemical, what am I going to get? Most of the time you get the byproduct. And at times you do surveys to get some information to help you investigate certain things. And so when you think of some of the questions, you think of various gaps within some of these methods that are out there. Your responsibility is try as best as possible to fill in some of those gaps. In the textbook, there are very different figures or diagrams. Please take time to try to understand these figures or diagrams or tables. They can really help you understand the process. Because as I said, research is something that is very important. You will have to use it along the way. And some of you might have already used it. But it's never enough to just have there's always room for you to continue to explore, for you to continue to know more. Because the more you know, the better it is. Because most of the time, there comes the difference. When you think of, even in your place of employment, those people who can really engage in research and do well, those are the people that provide a lot of value to their workplace, because their business is to come up with new data, new information. And when a company is known to show providing good data, good answers to certain solutions, that company really gets a high ranking. And if you are the one providing that data, then that puts you in a very good standing. So take the time to study this chapter. Now, if you look at the textbook, going back to see some of the research questions here on table 3.1. Say for literature, one, okay, are there gaps in our knowledge? That is, what don't we know? At times, there are certain things when you want to study about. As I said, you do the literature review. You see wherein you have some people having some problems with maybe obesity or depression or whatnot. Say an example of a research question is why is eating processed food associated with higher risk of depression? See, this is a solid research question. Why is eating processed food associated with higher risk of depression? And you can change this in other ways when it comes to dealing with people who get most of what their foods from convenience stores. Most of what they get from those convenience stores are processed foods. So again, is poverty any link? Does poverty contribute? Has junk food become a social norm? See, your first answer is yes, but do the research to really make sure that a lot of people are doing it and accept it as it's okay. Don't just say because, oh, well, whenever there's a game, everybody buys chips and everybody's eating their chips, potato chips or other whatever form of chips or hamburger and all those other, they say like, you think of sodas, all of these are certain foods that they become part of the social norm. Have they been accepted? How can we encourage families to come to healthy eating classes in the local communities? Especially when you think of issues of trying to find ways to deal with overweight, obesity, trying to deal with hypertension, try to deal with type 2 diabetes. Most of these conditions, some of these conditions have their roots with what we eat, how much of it that we eat. Does the delivery of healthy eating classes lead to any or alterations in family eating habits? You see, because at times knowledge most of the time does not completely transfer itself into practice. Some people have the knowledge that eating junk food is unhealthy, but guess what? When they are hungry, they go for junk food. Some of it is not poverty, it's just what they want. It's habit. That's what their taste buds crave for junk food. So there are certain times where knowledge alone is great, but to convert knowledge to practice, it takes far more. So some people can go into the classes, get all the information about healthy eating. And when they go home, some people either don't have the means to really buy some of those things that they need for healthy eating, or their eating habits have just been so programmed that nothing counts. It's junk food. Without junk food, nothing else counts. So some of these things can be a challenge. Qualitative sampling. Sampling is a process of selecting units, people, organizations to your target population, the people that you're going to use for your research are called target population from a population of interest. So, okay, generalizability is the most common goal in quantitative sampling, especially when you randomize your study. Then you can generalize the finding. You can use a selected group because most of the time 10 depending on the sensitivity of your study, you have a small group, but if it's properly randomized, you can be able to generalize. Even though the study was done in one area, like at BSU, you randomize various level of classes of students, first year, second year, this, asking, have them to participate in your study. Or you said, okay, I'm using some students from VSU, student from from Carolina, Elizabeth City, student from um, say from Howard, or some of those other schools, say in the Atlanta, the South. If you use those students, you can generalize. If you get samples from each of those students, at the end, you can use that study to generalize that based on this. You can say, okay, depending on what you study, African American student ages this or that, or class this to that class exhibits this sort of behavior. There are three different types of qualitative sampling or strategies. Steps in qualitative sampling include: identify the population of interest. As I said, your population of interest becomes your target population or target group. Deciding what type of sampling strategy is possible, what of that sort of question, are you going to use some of those lilac and kind of very much, not much, no, yes or no questions, or questions with short answers? Consider if there will be difficulties in gaining access and recruitment of participation. Again, you have to make sure that you contact the right people to help you with your study, because you cannot just go to a place and say, oh, I want to study your people. There's a process. You either contact some administrator or some faculty member, explain your study, see if he or she is interested to help you administer your study to his or her students or other people within that school. Consider how to improve the response rate. See, some people find ways to either extra points or those or some reward. At times, again, you have to try as best as possible so that people do it because they really want to do it. Paying people to respond to some things most of the time, I don't know whether you're really getting the right sort of response that you're looking for. Quantitative analysis. You have to analyze how to analyze your study. Says you quantitative data involves the analysis of numerous data and is best understood using statistical package. Now you have the PASW, formerly the SPSS. Quantitative research is considered with measurement. Measurement is simply assigning value to outcome. There are different levels and scales of measurement, which help researchers to decide how the most appropriate mathematical manipulations to understand on their data, to undertake on their data, and to choose appropriate statistical tests. Quantitative analysis involves working with statistics. Most of the time it's descriptive and inferential. Okay, we stop here for today. And again, as I said, this is an important, it's a very important chapter. Please read more so that you can get yourself be better prepared to deal with your term paper. When a teacher says, okay, write a paper, you know how to do the literature review. And from there, you can see what you need to do on how to go about conducting the research, because it's extremely important that you know this. So we stop here today. And make sure you take care of yourself and stay safe.